they are fucking sick of each other. They've just been on tour for however long. It's really intense. So like it's an interesting question. Like, were Jerry and Layne friends? Like, from my perspective in the studio, it was kind of like they were just tolerating each other, you know?
Hey guys, in this video, I'm going to explore the relationship between Layne Staley and Jerry Cantrell. I'm going to show to you clips from my interviews with Alice in Chains recording engineer Jonathan Plum, and I'm also going to read to you a few quotes from Jerry Cantrell regarding Layne Staley. All the interviews on my channel are original. Thanks for watching.
I don't think Jerry didn't like Layne. I mean, I just think the relationship just gets so complicated and so intense, you know, between touring, spending time together, and then the creative process. I don't think it's fair to say that they didn't respect each other or like each other. I just think out of being a professional, it's like you get to that place where, you know, you're in a room together and it's not really the person you want to see, you know? And I'm sure, you know, I've heard them talk about like they're brothers. It's a total brotherhood. You know, there's so many things go unsaid. Like you can get in a room with each other and not even say hi, but they know it's all cool. I think they were operating at that. I think any band that's been together for that long, you operate at that level. You're way beyond like the pleasantries. So I'm sure Jerry had a ton of, you know, admiration and respect and for Layne, without a doubt. I mean, I think everyone could relate to it as just a relationship. If you have like a best friend, or if it's your, you know, romantic partner, you know, if you've been with someone for a long, long time, it gets complicated. So I think at that point with Alice, you know, they'd been best friends. They'd already been best friends for a long, long time, you know, and it's tough, you know, being the amount of pressure on the band and the relationship. It's really, really intense. I mean, I don't know. Hopefully fans understand this, that holding a band together, especially through like this kind of ups and downs of that success that Alice experienced, it's incredibly hard on the interpersonal level, having to make decisions and the power struggles within the band. Like, it's so complex. And I think any band that can hold themselves together, it's like, it takes massive communication skills and massive like adulting and compromising. And it's no joke. Like, it's really, and it's funny to me because I think as an adult now, it's like knowing what it's like to really dig deep into like making conscientious decision as a group and communicating clearly and not having your feelings be hurt to the point where you can't function anymore. Like, these guys were dealing with those levels of decision making in their mid-20s. You know, it's like, it's a miracle to me that they could stay together as long as they did and function as well. It's a miracle to me that any band can stay together through all that stuff. It's just the intensity of it. I mean, I'm sure that, you know, you feed off the success, but it's still like every day you have to make decisions. A band has to make decisions, you know, and not everybody agrees all the. In fact, most times people don't agree. So it's like there becomes a hierarchy in the band where people, I think, eventually, if you're not the one making decisions, it's pretty easy just to kind of like be a backseat person, where I think Layne kind of tended to be more the backseat person in the band.
You mentioned earlier that particularly during SAP, Layne would chill in the studio and Jerry would call the shots. Did that cause any friction between the two of them, or were they good?
For my perspective, you know, being a studio, when they came in, they had already obviously established their working relationship. And it's funny now, being sort of like more of an adult and experiencing life a lot more. You kind of, in those instances, you can sense the fumes in the band, like all the dynamics between everybody, because it's a family, right? And it's like any relationship, it's a very complex relationship between all the band members. And they had a working thing that worked, and it was like unspoken, but really it was like Layne knew to just stay out of the way for the most part. Either he didn't want to be part of it, or, you know, it all seemed really smooth to me, but they had already worked it out. Like, I feel like they probably had, you know, maybe years ago before that, kind of worked out who's, you know, how they work best. Every band has to confront that, and it's a constant power struggle. So like, was it easy for them? I never saw them fighting, but I just know from how bands work, it's a constant struggle, you know, because everybody is passionate and cares about it. And, you know, they're spending all day thinking about how they want the process to go. And each band member has their own idea. And obviously Jerry was very, very strong in his opinions and his creativity. And Layne was too. So I can only imagine that they'd been butting heads for years, you know? So I think at that point, Layne was just like, man, I know it's just to give Jerry this time and space, you know? So Yeah, it seemed like they were very seasoned at that point. By the time I was working with them on SAP, they were seasoned and they knew how to be in the studio and they knew how to be productive in the studio. It wasn't like they were new at this, you know, they knew what they were doing.
So a lot of times, not just with bands, but with people in general, when they're in their work environment, they may be more intense, so to speak, than when they're not working. Did you ever get to see the guys outside the studio? And if you did, were they more mellow? Like, did they carry themselves differently?
That's a great question. A little bit. I saw Jerry a little bit because Jerry is pretty social. So there was a club. There was a club in Seattle. It's closed now. It's called the Brick Street. It was just a scene. So I'd hung out a little bit with Jerry, and he kind of always like recognized me. My impression was that he was just an intense guy. And then Layne, on the other hand, was kind of like the opposite, where Layne was a totally chill hang. And I never really saw him outside the studio, but when he was in the studio, he was super relaxed and really friendly. Like super down to earth. And I remember this like left a huge impression on me. And I'm sure we've talked about this before, but when I met Layne, he was the kind of guy that would just walk in and be like, "Hey man, what's your name? And how long you worked here?" And he would share with me. I remember one day he said he had just helped his dad load some firewood in his truck. And then he would just sit on the couch and like literally watch cartoons. And I'm sure I told this story before, but he ate cereal and he filled out the back of the cereal box. And it's just like, yeah, he was just a total pleasure and joy to hang out with. He's just funny. And so I don't know, like what was he like outside the studio? That's a really good question. I just, that's kind of the code in the studio. Like I think when those guys would show up, they'd already, you know, what any of the partying that they did or whatever, maybe they were hungover, but they'd always sort of show up late in the day, all at different times. And they always seemed to sort of have chaos going on in their lives, but they'd show up and hang out for quite a while and get settled and then just pick up an instrument and it start happening.
I'm going to share with you a clip now from my first interview with Alice in Chains engineer Jonathan Plum, where he discusses the dynamic between Layne and Jerry and more. If you want to see the full-length version of either of the interviews I've done with Jonathan Plum, the links are in the description box below.
You know, Jerry Cantrell, he's really the creative force in that band, and he's really, really intense. Jerry was very, very intense, and he wasn't unfriendly to me, but he also didn't go out of his way to, you know, get to know me in the slightest. He just like, I need coffee, I need this over here, I need this mic'd up, and turn that up. But I understood he was, you know, that's kind of the way the studio works is like, you know, we're here a facility to facilitate their art. And so if he's in intense space and needs to get his creative thing out, like I'm there to facilitate that. Mm-hmm. Juxtapose Layne Staley, who was the opposite. He was kind of more like Mike McCready. It's through my 19, 20-year-old eyes, it was like Layne Staley came in and he was really relaxed and he was really friendly. He asked about me. He asked about how long I'd worked here. And he told me a story about he was just like moving wood with his dad. And Layne would sit on the couch and I remember he would eat breakfast cereal. And one story where it was like, I don't remember, like some kind of puff cereal. Yeah. And on the back, it had like this questionnaire that kids were supposed to fill out. And he filled it out. It was totally like disgusting. I remember something about sticking something in his urethra. And he put it up on the fridge when he was all done with it. So that was my impression of Layne. He was just like really fun-loving. And where Jerry was very intense and getting down to work. And another, like my favorite, a really big impression on me of working with Alice was we were working on SAP, and SAP was filled with a lot of more ballads. Because I knew Alice in Chains from Facelift, which was the rock record. Yeah. And so they were back here doing SAP, and a lot of the songs, the first few songs I worked on with them were more the ballads. And I remember we were having to do a lot of takes over and over, and I remember asking Rick, again, Rick Brosh was producing these sessions, and I remember asking Rick, like, wow, it takes him a lot of work to get these takes, and he's not even like shouting, he's singing softly. And Rick's like, yeah, singing softer is actually harder typically for singers, and to the screaming, the belting thing, like that's where Layne lives. Like that's really easy for him. We usually get that in one take. It's the singing soft part that takes a little more time. So at that point I hadn't heard Layne scream, like his typical scream, but I really was excited to. And I don't know that we ever actually did any screaming vocals. I guess later we did actually, but on the SAP, when I came in, SAP was already mostly done. We were just finishing it up. But I remember Layne, again, was in the vocal booth, and he walked in the control room, and he was frustrated because he couldn't sing, and he just yelled, fuck, at the top of his lungs. But it was that Layne yell. And that was the first moment I heard Layne's voice, just not on mic, him just being fresh and going, fuck. And I was like, whoa, that's the voice.
You should have recorded that, man. That would be awesome.
Yeah. So that really, it just shook me, you know, it was like rattled me to hear that voice in person in front of my face. And, you know, and I just love, I'm a huge Layne Staley fan. I just love his voice so much. So
yeah,
I'll always remember that moment. They would come and use the studio for long hours and really get to work. And I remember being really nervous around those guys because of how intense they worked. I kind of felt like compared to Pearl Jam, when Alice came in, it was just music work. There wasn't a lot of downtime. So I remember having to really be on my ball as an engineer. I remember Layne coming in with his 4-track. What was the song about? Hey.
Oh, that's
South?
Stay Away.
I
Stay Away. Yeah.
I Stay Away. Yeah, I believe my memory was that Layne showed up with the cassette tape of those vocals demoed with the harmonies and everything that he did at home. That I think he probably just did at home like that day, and he showed up and played it for us. You know, he's playing for Jerry probably. Yeah. So I assume that he had wrote those lyrics and wrote those harmonies. Oh, another quick memory was, you know, we didn't talk about Layne, the way that they did harmonies. I mean, because that's one of my favorite things about Alice is the way that they did their harmonies. And then I think they had gotten so good at it, and Toby, the producer of Jar of Flies, knew too. So Layne would lay down a vocal track, and Toby would say, "You got a harmony for that?" And Layne was like, "Yeah, hit record." And then Layne would add a harmony, and then Toby would say, "You got another one?" He'd say, "Yeah, hit record." He had another harmony, and I think, you know, on that song, we had like a stack of maybe 4 harmonies that he just went after another. And then Toby's like, Layne was like, "Yeah, I think that's it." And Toby's like, "Let's try one more. You got one more?" He's like, "I don't know. Wait, roll it." And it was that 5th one, he'd find that really twisted harmony that a lot of the Alice has. It has just like that kind of fucked up harmony. And that was Layne just finding it on the spot, you know. It was sort of Toby pushing him, saying, let's just do one more.
That's so cool. So you said he recorded some stuff on a cassette at home. Did you guys ever use any of those home recordings?
No, I think those were just like examples. Yeah, we redid everything.
You worked with Alice in Chains on multiple records. Did Layne's approach to vocals ever change at all record to record, or was it always more or less the same type of approach?
I think it got more so, like I was talking about, I think as the years went on, and you know, I worked on Jar of Flies, I worked on Sap, and I worked in the beginning of, I guess, which is now the Dog record. And I guess what I saw was Layne just nailing it nearly instantly within one take. And if he was asked to do something again, he kind of got grumpy about it. So I would say he just got he just got better, you know, like as the years went on, I felt like.
Yeah. Some vocalists like to use specific mics and specific gear. Was there anything specific that Layne liked to use when he was recording his vocals?
You know, I don't remember anything that he requested, but I do remember this was on the Jar of Flies album, which was produced by Toby Wright. I remember this is kind of a nerdy thing, I don't know if this is the...
Yeah, no worries, it's cool enough, yeah.
But he had rented, I think, 5 or 6 microphones from Los Angeles, like a high-end microphone rental company.
Toby rented these mics?
Yeah, for Layne. I think we set up about 5 different mics and had him sing a little bit on each mic, and we ended up with this vintage... It was probably a vintage Tube U67 that just sounded killer. And we had again, this is nerdy, but we had a LA2A tube compressor in the vocal booth, or in the control room that we were running his vocals through. And this is maybe a testament to how quick he worked, is we were just still getting a vocal sound set up. We had to get the dials just right to get the right level and all that stuff. And we hit record, and we were really just still testing everything. And he just got the take. It was like, and unfortunately I don't remember which song it was. I'd have to go back and listen to it, but it was off Jar of Flies. And I remember the beginning of the song started soft, so we set our knobs to sort of the soft setting. And throughout the song, he starts getting louder and starts screaming. And I remember the level was so hot, it was distorting the tube compressor and it was distorting the tape. And I remember sitting next to Toby, and Toby was the engineer, and he was really responsible for it. I was like, shoot, Toby, that distorted. It's distorted. Can we use that? And Toby just looks at me. He's like, that was gold. Doesn't matter. And so I'll have to look up the song. I can't remember what song it was, but you can hear it distorting on the recording still. And that was the take. It was like we were still just getting a sound set up, and we got...
Damn.
Yeah. So that's a good story of like how he worked.
His voice was powerful enough that it distorted
yeah,
the machine.
and we just... That shows you how much we had to be on the ball around someone like Layne. And Jerry, too. It's like they're so creative, and it's like you just have to hit record. Anytime they're playing music, you hit record.
Yeah, that's crazy. Did Layne ever blow out his voice when he was singing?
No, Layne, he really knew what he was doing with his voice. Yeah. I mean, I've heard stories from live that he really knew how to take care of his voice.
And so, you mentioned a little earlier that Jerry Cantrell, from your experience, was like the creative force in the band. Mm-hmm. So what was the relationship between Layne and Jerry in that band?
So again, this is just through my lens. And again, I was 19, 20, 21 at this point. And I was just the house engineer here. So I really didn't know entirely how the music industry worked at that point. But my impression was Jerry was here 16 hours a day. He didn't leave the studio. He'd show up. It was coffee after coffee, and he was part of every single decision. Where I think Layne was spending a lot more time on the couch filling out breakfast cereal boxes, and was asked to come in to sing. But there was so much happening outside the studio. Like I remember, and I don't know. For the history books, I don't know where this fit in, but I remember Layne would show up. He had a cassette 4-track that he was home recording ideas for, and he would show up and play the ideas for the band, and mostly Jerry and Toby probably. And that was later. So I think, from what I understand about history, later Layne got more involved in the writing and the lyric process, and I think maybe that was what I was seeing was Layne doing writing at home and bringing ideas in to show Jerry. So I imagine there was a lot more tug of war happening that I just didn't see. I mean, from my perspective, everyone got along. It seemed really easy, but I would say Layne was kind of didn't have his head in the process the whole time. He would come in and sing, and then he would sort of disappear. Where Jerry was very much part of every moment that got recorded.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, that was my impression.
The following are various quotes from Jerry Cantrell regarding the death of Layne Staley. Quote, "I'd say the same thing about Layne that I'd say about Kurt. It's too bad we lost them because they were amazing people and amazing artists. We dealt with all of that privately and are continuing to do so. The reality of Layne dying and the reality of what to do with the rest of your life. I kind of put that into a song, Black Gives Way to Blue. I guess that was the first time I kind of said it out loud. The thing about addiction is it's got you well before you ever realize it's got you. You're screwed before you even know it. You can go around for years without even knowing it, and everyone else around you knows it. And even if you do, you ain't gonna admit it. I've battled that with myself. At some point, you reach a point where you can deal with it, or you don't. In a lot of cases, it deals with you, and you lose people. We all drifted apart into our own worlds at one point. We kept in contact, and there was always talk of something that would maybe happen again. There's a tension created of having 2 #1 records and not being able to do anything about it. But that wasn't all Layne's fault either. He's the one that paid the ultimate price for what we were all screwing around with. All I can say about it is this, really. At this particular time, years have passed now. And the longer you end up sticking around, the more friends you lose one way or another. It's a part of life. It's unfortunate when it's that type of exit, because there's a lot of life left to live. But I learned a lot from that guy. I owe a lot to him. Many fond memories and a lot of music to listen to that we've created together. I've got a lifetime of memories about him that no one else really will have. It's something I miss, but at the same time, I can't be bummed about it. I'm really thankful for what we had and what we did, and something that still lasts. I still hear his voice every day on the radio, and if I don't hear him personally, I hear him through some other kid emulating him, and that's great. I was lucky enough to have the experience to be in a band like I was, and to be in a band with the type of guys that I was with, and still am. I think he is remembered as a great singer, a very unique style, and those who knew him personally remember him as a beautiful person. I can't really ever think of a moment I ever saw him that he was super pissed about anything. I'm sure he had his moments once or twice, but he was always the guy that was a peacemaker. He cared about people, what he did, and the type of music he played. When we got famous, everything around us changed, and quickly. All of a sudden, we were able to buy houses. We've been living on people's couches for years. Even when we weren't touring because we were working so hard, what's the point of buying a house? We're never home anyways. So by the time we got home after Dirt, this is like 2 years in the making that record and touring, we were done by the end of that. It puts a wear on you, and you develop a few bad habits here and there that are not conducive to stopping. It's not like, oh, you become a drug addict. It's something that develops over time. And it's also indicative to the gig, because you're the party in the town every night. We had a lot of fun for a lot of years, and then we all of a sudden had a lot of time off and a ton of money." End quote.
What was it like reforming Alice in Chains without Layne Staley? A lot of people feel that the band died with Layne, so what was the point of reforming without him? I'm going to share with you now a few quotes from Jerry Cantrell where he discusses this, and then later on, I'm going to share with you a quote from Jerry where he discusses how he met Layne Staley, and then how the band took off. Now, in terms of replacing Layne Staley with William DuVall, how did that come together? And what did Jerry Cantrell think of Black Gives Way to Blue, the first record without Layne? It was released in 2009, and according to Jerry, that record was a, quote, love letter to Layne. He called the record a love letter to Layne during an interview with Vice in 2018.
At one point in the interview, Jerry was asked the following question, quote, "You brought in William DuVall to tour with Alice in Chains after meeting him on one of your solo tours. That must have been a little terrifying for you, but especially for him." End quote. This was Jerry's response, quote, "I commend him for sticking it out. He's earned the right to be here. He was there for the right reasons, to make the best music we can. We toured for a year and a half, and then we were going to put it to bed. But you get creative guys together, and stuff's going to happen. So we started writing tunes. At the end of that period of time, we had a lot of tunes, and it sounded good. It sounded like us. The first consideration was making sure that we were okay with it. So we just started working on what would become Black Gives Way to Blue. That record, and the title track, Black Gives Way to Blue, is a love letter to Layne. It's a goodbye to him. We weren't nervous, because we felt the same way we felt every time we put a record out. We knew it was good. We were continuing on. We were reinventing ourselves. Those are all elements of everybody's life. We weren't ready to give up yet. And we were thankfully proven right, and the majority of our fans came along with us, minus like 3 trolls. No Layne, no chains kind of BS. End quote. In March of 2022, Jerry Cantrell was asked the following by journalist Stephen Hill. What was it like stepping back on stage with Alice in Chains when you were formed in 2005? This was Jerry's response, quote, "The second half of our career is completely different from the first half, but it's pretty much the same at the same time. You go where it feels right. You've walked these roads before, and your brothers have been there with you, and when time comes to celebrate, you do it with your buddies. You can't lose that way. You did some stuff, you did it with your friends, you stuck to your guns, and some people responded to it, and they still stick with you today."